Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Dyer and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, March the 1st. Hope you all enjoyed your extra day yesterday on the 29th. Now let me leap towards introducing you to this week's panel. I tried. Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward. Marianne Goodland, chief legislative reporter for the Colorado Politics and Colorado Springs and Denver Gazettes. Tyrone Glover, leading criminal and civil rights attorney here in the Denver area, and also Ed Sealover, VP of Strategic Initiatives, and also the editor of The Sun and Substance at the Colorado Chamber of Commerce. We are entering March Madness, aren't we? With Colorado and 14 other states and a territory voting this coming Tuesday in the primary elections for the presidency. Patty, lots of questions. What will turnout be like in Colorado? Will the independents and unaffiliates come out in Colorado?
I think the turnout will be fairly low in Colorado right now because you've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Even though the Supreme Court said they are taking up the Trump immunity question, they have not yet ruled on whether or not Trump is officially banned from the Colorado ballot. So there's a lot of uncertainty. I think Republicans are kind of up in the air about what they want to do anyway in Colorado, if not the rest of the country. But Democrats have a really interesting option, which is the non-committed delegate. And I think we're going to be surprised by how many people go for that. You had David Skaggs, who was in Congress for 12 years, saying that he was taking that he really doesn't feel Biden should run again, but he feels there should be a Democrat, that we cannot have Trump. So he had an op-ed in that was really interesting. So the presidential primary in Colorado, our votes aren't going to matter that much, but we've already been so much in the news because of the ban of Trump. I think the primary in June is going to be the big one. That's when you've got Congress. And right before her own son was arrested on several counts in rifle, Lauren Boebert had just tweeted about the Biden crime family. So we have a lot on our plate in Colorado.
Right.
I'm interested to see how Nikki Haley does. I'm curious to see how much of the Republican base is still in the Trump camp. I'm assuming a substantial portion of it, but if there is enough dissatisfaction with Trump for Nikki Haley to make a better showing here than she has everywhere else, including in her own state where she lost fairly big last week. To the June primaries, Congress will be fascinating to watch, but I'm also watching the legislature because I think is going to be where there's going to be some really interesting stories. There are a lot of primaries going on, and these are not just primaries for seats that are going to be open, but you're seeing a lot of primaries for sitting incumbent lawmakers, and that's a little bit unusual. You don't see that. You've got and it's on both sides of the aisle, both for Republicans and Democrats are facing some primaries that you might not expect.
Okay, Tyrone.
Yeah, and for a primary where you have two clear frontrunners on both sides, this is the most interesting one I've at least seen in my lifetime. We have Trump, who the justices of the Supreme Court are still deliberating. They could literally come down with a decision. It could. This may be stale. Tomorrow we could have a decision. And my understanding is if that happens, then all of those votes, all of those ones that have already been mailed in would not be counted. Would those have been folks who would have voted for a different candidate? Would they have voted for Nikki Haley? We don't know. And that is definitely a possibility. I think the real saving grace there is I think no one expects it to be a favorable decision upholding the Colorado Supreme Court. Justices across really the sort of ideological spectrum seem poised to reject. But then also we're looking at the momentum from these uncommitted voters in Michigan. There's not the campaign that there necessarily was here, but I think the nation is watching, and we could see some protest votes here too in Colorado.
Mm-hmm. Ed.
I'm really curious to see the results of the primary because I think they will dictate a little bit what we're going to see in June. Let's think back to a time in 2016, which seems like it's about 150 years ago, when all of Colorado's delegates were committed to Ted Cruz because there was such a Trump pushback in this state. Like has been said about Nikki Haley, she's not going to win, but I want to see how big the percentage is there because I think that's going to play out in two congressional races in June. One in the 3rd district. You look at Jeff Hurd, who is the Republican arguably front runner for the now open seat in the 3rd District, getting a lot of traditional Republican support, but going up against Ron Hanks, who's as Trumpian as you get, trying to get in that district. I think it'll be interesting to see if Haley gets a lot of support. Maybe that bodes extremely well for Hurd and feeling good out there. Same with the 4th District now. I know you talked about it last week, but the idea that Cory Gardner jumped out of kind of quiet solitude and jumped in to endorse Jerry Sonnenberg tells a lot in that race about who is going to have the traditional Republican support. If Nikki Haley gets a lot of support, I would expect that someone like Jerry Sonnenberg will benefit from that as well.
And I know it's still far away. Do we think, after all these troubles again this week, that Lauren Boebert's campaign, I mean, she has filed, she's definitely running in the 4th, but...
Same day. She got her petitions in the same day her son was arrested. I think this will pretty much kill her campaign.
Do you?
Well, you've got so many good options in the 4th, too.
I don't know that you could call Jerry Sonnenberg anti-Trump. I think he is looking for votes from everybody, and if Haley does well, I'm sure that benefits him, but I think if Trump does well, that benefits him too.
I wasn't going to trying to call Sonnenberg anti-Trump, but I think he's more traditionally in the Republican mold, and especially as you've got 12 people that are currently in that race right now. Normally the idea of your classic Republican hasn't done well in primaries in recent years, except for Colorado, where they swept the field in the 2022 Republican primaries. But when you get that one standout there that may be not anti-Trump, but still hearkening back to the old days, running against a lot more pro-Trumpian candidates, that may give them an advantage in a very divided field.
Okay, let's talk about what has taken place this week at the state capitol. Marianne, you are ears and our eyes inside the legislature, so let's start with you.
We have had bills on gender identity that have tied up the House pretty well. And in fact, we are expected to be at the Capitol on Sunday for the final votes on these 2 measures. One is on schools being required to address a student by their preferred name. The other one has to do with felons who would be allowed to use a gender identity as a just cause for getting a name change. And both of those they've been very, very contentious debates in the House, and we expect Sunday to be no less contentious. The other thing that I've been observing, and I find this really interesting, is how we seem to have 2 legislatures at play right now. One is the traditional legislature with a lot of partisan bills, but then you also have, sort of quietly and behind the scenes, a lot of major policy work that's being done on a bipartisan basis, and we did not see that last year. And that's something that I'm following right now, and I think that is a hopeful sign for lawmakers actually working together, at least on some fairly big policy areas.
That's really good to hear, really good to hear. Tyrone.
And one area that we seem to all be united around was the Senate Bill 49, which was resoundingly defeated. This banned books front lines have come to Colorado. There was a very high-profile civil rights case, and now this bill, which was ultimately defeated. So I think this was definitely a statement to where our communities and this state is, and for the access to free speech and public access to community resources and the free flow of information. And just in time for Butterfly in the Sky, the Reading Rainbow documentary, to come to theaters next month. So I was definitely happy amongst all of the tension to see that one not go anywhere.
There's a lot of focus now on the gender identity bills, but I think there's going to be even bigger furor coming up over the air quality bills. No less than 6 bills have been introduced in recent weeks that seek to improve Colorado's air quality. That is a goal that I think everybody shares, but it's the specific ways these bills go about it. They're doing things such as proposing a ban on all new oil and gas wells after 2030, proposing a summertime ban on oil and gas drilling. And one interesting thing that was introduced this week would overturn key parts of an Air Quality Control Commission rulemaking on how to cut down on manufacturing facilities emissions because the proponents of the bill think it wasn't strict enough. These are bills that are definitely major impacts on the economy as well as major impacts on the environment. Governor Polis has already seemed to come out and say, I'm not sure that some of these are where we want to go. I think it's going to create a big battle over how is it that we clean the air? What can we do? Is this too far? And what impacts is it going to have beyond just the air?
Okay, Patty.
Yeah, that is going to be an ugly fight, and a lot of little fights too, because there's so many different bills. To go back to that transgender issue, it's fascinating because one of the bills was really pushed by students from Monument High School. And when you see their argument and what it has meant to students who are transgender to be able to be called by the name they are now using, one kid had gone through a transition during COVID. So when that student returned to school, to have the old name used really kind of busted the student on who'd changed gender. That's a very sincere, tricky bill. The one with the felons is far trickier because you're talking about people who maybe everyone has a right to know what they did no matter what their name was at the time. So we're going to see a lot of fighting there. I would also like to see much more discussion of the statute of limitations on the sex assault. I've talked to several people. We talked about that earlier in the season, that there are some really, really sincere people who would like to be able to hold authorities accountable years, decades later for horrific abuse. So we need a serious conversation about that.
The city of Denver has hit a turning point, as described by Mayor Johnston this week, when he announced that we are now going to be consolidating some of the migrant shelters within the city. The day before that announcement was made, Mayor Johnston announced goals that he has for the city for 2024, items that are different from, they include, but the homeless and the migrant crises. There are other issues that he is now focusing on, Tyrone.
Yeah, I mean, consistent with the Denver that I know. I mean, when I moved out here 18 years ago, from California, this felt like a city that really came together around getting things done, a place that was really thriving. I saw politicians and community leaders working across the aisles, working across ideologies to move forward collectively and really valued unity. And I think that that's what we're really, starting to see. We're in a really tough time, between homelessness and then sort of some of the unforeseen fallout of the migrant crisis. We're in a really critical time, and there are uphill battles. And what we're seeing, I think, from the mayor is a call for us to come together, to unify, to not sort of turn our backs, to change our status as a city. We're choosing unity over isolation because we're really, thinking about our cities, our community, and ultimately our future. So it is an ambitious agenda, especially to achieve with all of the budget cuts and all that we're facing. But I think together we can ultimately get there.
You've seen Mayor Johnston call repeatedly for more federal help on this. I just wonder how long it's going to be until he asks for more state help on this. There have already been talks at the Capitol among people like, oh, look how much we're not doing, how the Capitol is staying out of this. There seems to be some consternation from Denver officials and particularly Denver representatives about that. I don't know that there's actually a lot that the state can do. It's got a very tight budget this year, and this is not something the state has traditionally waded into, not that we've traditionally had a lot of migrant crises here in Colorado. But I will be curious to see if that is the next level of conversation, and if with all the other things we just talked about that the state government has to deal with, we are soon going to be adding migrant crisis to that.
Mm-hmm. Patty.
Well, there was a reference during that to the state having loaned some people, I think, to help the city on the migrant issue. I thought Johnston was smart to kind of put the homelessness issue aside when he came up with these 4 different prongs, areas he's going to work on. It was refreshing to see actual charts and plans and graphs when we hadn't seen that for years, really, coming out of Colorado. That he acknowledged, that there's going to be a new planning director soon, and they need to work on permitting. They need to work on public safety. They have a whole lot of issues they have to work on besides the migrant issues. So I thought it was a good call to arms, as Tyrone said. But when you're talking about the migrant issue, we have to remember it's not just Denver. I mean, we're not sending out a welcome mat down to Mexico and, please, sending postcards, please come here. People will come, and it is going to be a statewide problem.
Mm-hmm. It will be. Marianne.
As the resident budget wonk, or at least one of the things that I find really fascinating, I found it fascinating that the mayor announced that he was going to start closing some of these migrant shelters, and I think he's taking a lot of heat over the cost. he had anticipated a $180 million hit to the city budget on this. Now he's got it down to $120 million, but it still means budget cuts. The other thing is this bizarre statement about whether people are being laid off or they're just getting their hours cut to nothing, which means they're laid off, they're just not laid off. I found that kind of disingenuous. And you have to feel for those people who are trying to do the best they can to provide city services, and it coming down to, well, we can't afford to keep you, but we're not going to lay you off, but you can get unemployment. I mean, this messaging just did not work to me.
It doesn't make sense.
Well, I'm just waiting for the people to go out and have this special flower fund, because they're going to miss the flowers too. And when you're trying to come up with an image of a city and they want to push the downtown image, you want Denver to look good on top of it. So I'm guessing we will see philanthropists planting flowers.
Okay. All right. This week, the Polis administration released a second version, a 2.0 version of its plan to curb greenhouse gas pollution here in Colorado. And these are more short-term steps to get to the ultimate goal that Governor Polis has, Ed.
Yes, yeah. If we think about all the bills that we tend to talk about on this show as kind of the smaller picture, not that some of them are small, but focuses on how to deal with greenhouse gas emissions, this is the big picture. 3 years ago, they laid out their first greenhouse gas pollution roadmap, and 95% of the things that Polis asked to be done in that have been done at this point. That doesn't mean we've gotten our goals yet. 80% of the way there already to reaching our 2030 goal for reducing emissions. This is part two, and he's got 49 new steps in here, and they are a mixture of everything. There are some land use strategies that he wants to incorporate for the first time into this. That's not an easy one. That's not a quick fix at all. There are some things that are going to cost money. Making more low energy buildings, electrification of appliances, reducing methane emissions from landfills. These are going to be costly steps that businesses are going to have to go through. And also reforming the distribution system, acknowledging the fact that if we're going to electrify as much as he wants us to electrify, we need to be able to handle that load on the grid, which we cannot now do. I will say one other thing. In the appendix of this report, there was an interesting note where he said, here are the things that we were asked to consider and we didn't consider. And he laid out over 2 pages why he refused to consider a ban on new oil and gas wells at the same time that the legislature is considering that. And the quote that I took from it is, a strategy of limiting the supply of fossil fuels will harm lower income residents and cause significant public concern. So while Polis is doing the big picture and planning ahead for the next 3 years with all these steps, he's also kind of getting into fights with his own party with statements like that about what we're going to do in the short term with bills that are coming up this year.
Okay, Patty.
Well, we talked about it a few weeks ago. So the annual Colorado College Conservation in the West poll came out, and more than ever before, people agree they care about the environment, they want to do something. But what we also see is no one agrees at all on what has to be done. When you talk about footnotes, I was fascinated to see Diana DeGette come up in Congress with a, let's think about nuclear power bill, which was really surprising. Nuclear power, who would have heard about that decades ago, even a decade ago? So I think Polis is at least outlining steps, not unlike Johnston this week, with his city plans, but how many will be able to get through, what kind of sacrifices there'll be, and what kind of fights are there going to be over oil and gas. We will see how that goes, and it's not going to be done before he's term limited out of the governorship.
Yeah. Aaron.
The thing that fascinated me about this 2.0 plan is it doable? And given the cost that business is going to have to shoulder on this, I think one estimate was $3.1 billion to do just one aspect of these, and this was just for building owners. Is that doable? The other, and is it technically possible? And there's a lot of questions being raised about whether that's even doable. And to Patty's point about him being out of office, he's out of office in 2026, or at the end of 2026. Some of those goals, the question is, do people continue to work toward those goals once he's out of office? And I think that that's going to be a really interesting question when we start looking at who's going to succeed Jared Polis as governor. Is it a Democrat who's committed to climate change and continuing on with this plan, or is it going to be someone else?
These are the fights that we should be having, right? They're fights, but they're the right fights, right? We're not fighting about whether climate change is even real, and we're not just naysaying any way to address it. I see this as a tension between, let's move quickly enough to address the problem, but let's not move so quickly that we overburden our communities, we harm low-income communities, we harm small businesses, and the tension of that march towards some sort of solution while maintaining not only political support, but just being good stewards to our communities is, I just think that's where the battle line should ultimately be drawn.
All right, thank you. Now it's the time of the show where we go down the table and our panelists talk about some of the highs and the lows of the week. We've talked about some of them already, but Patty, I'll start with you. Let's talk about something that's not so great.
Well, it's what I talked about last week, but it has a happier ending, which is the vandalism at the Martin Luther King Memorial. People early on thought it was a hate crime, and now it's being investigated not as a hate crime, but as people who took the metal off the MLK statue to sell it for scrap metal. But what we can't forget is that hate crimes are definitely up, and so this one might have had a happier ending. It was just felons trying to make some money off a memorial, but we can't forget that many, many of these are very real hate crimes.
You're right.
I've had a couple of stories in the last couple of weeks on the Office of Public Guardianship. This is a state agency that is supposed to protect Colorado's most vulnerable people. These are people who have no one, no family, no friends, no children who can look after them, and they have a range of serious problems from mental illness and complicated by medical issues. These clients range in age from 21. They actually have got 7 clients under the age of 30 right now, 21 to the 90s, I think. And unfortunately, in the last year, all but 2 of their public guardians have quit. And state employees don't like to whistleblow, but 7 of those 10 people who quit wrote a letter to the governor saying, please take a look at this, help us out, help these clients who are now who no longer have anyone to look after them. These people originally were warehoused. Well, guess what? They're warehoused again.
Okay, all right. Sure.
In Aurora, the constitutional right to effective representation, in a criminal trial is under attack. That we are trying to privatize the Aurora Public Defender's Office. There's significant pushback from that office and many around our state. The right to effective counsel, regardless of your means or your income level, is just a bedrock of our community and our Constitution. And Colorado, both at the city and state level, I think really is a model for a lot of other states, and they look to us for training, and they look to us for how we've structured our indigent defense. Privatizing that is going to take away that independence, and I think ultimately end up costing the city of Aurora more money paying contractors than it would to have a standalone public defender's office. So there's some real battle lines, and it's getting pretty contentious there, but that's sort of what's been bumming me out lately.
Okay.
I realize there are more serious ills in the world, but as someone who's been in communication throughout my life, the debacle that Wendy's went through this week deserves some attention when it announced that it was looking into dynamic pricing, and people suddenly started saying, wait, you're going to do surge pricing for hamburgers? And then Wendy's came out and said, well, that wasn't what we meant by dynamic pricing, which is exactly how dynamic pricing is defined. For any company that's going to try to get a message out about change, make sure you know your definitions and what it means.
I agree with you. All right. Something good, Patty.
Well, we know what this means. It's Denver Restaurant Week
Yep.
starting today. Great time to get out and support small businesses and large businesses.
Yeah, it's fun. Always fun.
I have to do a shout out, even though he probably won't hear it, but my dad's 90th birthday was last week, and my husband and I flew to Indiana to celebrate with him. My love of politics and my career in music are both due to my dad. So happy birthday, Dad.
Oh, that's awesome. I have a 90-year-old mom, too. That's great. Tyrone.
So I'm an East Side guy, but I got to give a shout out to the North Side, the Highlands mommies, and they're impressive. I want to make sure I get the numbers right. 400 volunteers, 36,000 volunteer hours, 300 jobs, 61,000 meals to help deal with the influx of our newcomers. I've spoken, I think, a few times on this program about just how impressive this grassroots and community effort has been from Denver, and this just, I think, just further goes to support that.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good one. Yeah, those women are great.
Since we are taping this on the last day of Black History Month, I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite businesses I had a chance to profile back when I worked for the DBJ, KT Winery, started by entrepreneur Kristen Taylor, a winery that produces mom juice, a wine that is not for people looking for $100 bottles but can be drank by everyone. Is quite good, and started in the middle of the pandemic with a partner that she found from across the country who could only communicate online when they first started doing this. It's a great story, and if you ever get a chance to see mom juice bottles in the liquor store, know you are supporting a Colorado-led business.
White, red, all in between?
Both.
All right.
Yes.
All right, mom juice. Okay.
I know where I'm going after.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. All right, my high of this week is kind of a first we experienced this week. Denver had its first ever snow squall warning. That was when that quick snowstorm moved in on the Front Range. Was that on Tuesday? That was really something to watch it, but even better was how quickly it moved out, and now we are enjoying some lovely 60-degree weather as we start March. That's all I have. Just the warm weather is making me happy. Thank you, panel, for joining us this week. It was great to hear from all of you. Thank you all for watching as well or listening to our podcast. I hope you have a great weekend. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.